Well, hello YouTube. I don't normally do shaky cam sort of demonstrations, but I figured this was worth going over, maybe in a little more comprehensive manner than I've seen some other videos. What we got here is my recently re-slapped together gaming PC. It's still just an old Core 2 Duo model, nothing fancy, but I reloaded it with Windows 8 release preview, and we are going to take a quick look at storage spaces. Alright, now I don't actually use the start screen too much nowadays, despite Microsoft's best attempts to force measure down my throat. Alright, so here at the desktop, I'm going to show you my computer first. And what I've got here is Windows itself is loaded onto a 60 gig solid state disk, and that's all it's used for. 500 gigabyte media drive. The My Music, My Pictures, My Videos folders, they're all in there. Games drive, just for installing games too, because as I said, this is a gaming PC, that's all I really use it for. Diablo, Crysis, Nintendo emulator. I'm still reinstalling everything. And then this little temporary drive, which I'll get to here, and as if you can see on the screen here, and maybe just do a little tap to refocus here, these are all 500 gigabyte drives except for my 60 gig partition here. So I'm going to close this. Alright, this right here is the Storage Spaces control panel. And what I actually have in the computer is, you see these three drives before here, temp, games, media. What I actually have in the computer are the four hard drives. One is the boot drive, the solid state disk, which is not a part of Storage Spaces right now, and a 250 gigabyte Western Digital, 400 gigabyte Seagate, and another 250 gigabyte Seagate. These are just three drives that I'd accumulated over the years, and now with Windows 8 I've slapped them all in there and made more effective use of them. So if you look up here, I have a 836 gigabyte pool available to me, which I'm currently using 215 gigabytes of. Well, the way this works is that all three drives are pooled together, and on top of them I have logical drives, which take the form of these spaces. Now, each space is labeled at formatted at 500 gigabytes. Well, 1500 gigabytes is a lot more than 836. So what Microsoft is taking here is an approach that a lot of cloud computing platforms do. It's called thin provisioning. So I'm telling the computer that this space that I've created maxes out at 500 gigabytes. Now, just because I don't have 500 gigabytes available for all three of these doesn't matter. Were I to ever actually fill up all these drives and start capping out the 836 gigs that's available here, Windows would alert me to it, and it would inform me that I need to increase the available space to the storage pool. So when I first started out here, a lot of my media was actually scattered across the three physical drives that I've got down here. The 250 gigabyte Seagate here had most of my programs on it. The 400 gig had most of my media, and then the other 250 gig was actually a throwaway with a bad Windows 7 install on it, so that didn't matter at all. So what I ended up doing was I got all three drives hooked up into the tower. Then from the 400 gig drive, I copied all the media I was going to keep onto the 250 gigabyte drive. Then, in Storage Spaces, I went up here, and I created a new pool. It's going to tell me now that there are no drives available, but beforehand, when I didn't have anything provisioned for storage pools, it listed all three drives. I selected the two that were throwaways because I'd copied everything to the 250 gigabyte drive, and I created a 2-disk storage pool. So then what I did after that was I created this here temporary storage space, and I pretty much copied everything into it. Now, as you see right here, I'm going to zoom in for you. A little tap to refocus. It says simple, no resiliency. Well, that means I didn't, throw any data redundancy options onto the storage space that I created. There's nothing in there to save the data should a drive in this pool go bad. But as its name suggests, this was only temporary. I copied all the data off the 250 gig drive that's down here into this storage space, at which point I then added this 250 gig drive to the pool, destroying all the data that was on it, and then I created two new logical drives, the games drive and the media drive, to which I then relocated my user folders onto. So, if we do view files here, these are the storage spaces. I divvied out all the media content from the temporary storage space into them. So what I'm going to do now is delete the temporary space because I am done with it, and I want to reallocate all that space to make it available for my other two storage spaces here. So here, something else I want you to know here, I'm going to move the phone back in, is that you can see the percentage used for each drive. As I said before, I had a simple storage space set up for that temporary, and so almost all that data is actually allocated out to this one right here because I only had 2 drives available originally. So you're not going to see this on the screen. I'm going to back out. I'm going to delete the temporary storage space. Here it is, giving me the warning that I can't recover anything by doing this. Well, you know what? Okay. Buttons all the way down here. Hopefully they'll fix that. Delete storage space. And now I'm down to the 2. Show the physical drives again. 20%, 12.9, 20%. So remember, this is a 400 gigabyte drive. So as you can see, all the data is now actually pretty evenly distributed across all 3 drives now, because every time that you create a storage space in Windows 8 to make use of this pool, it automatically stripes data across all of your available drives. Now, hit change here on the games pool that I had made, or I'm sorry, the game space I had made, two-way mirror. I did the same thing with the media drive. Both of these are two-way mirrors, which means that every bit that I write into this logical drive is replicated onto a separate physical disk out of my storage pool. It's pretty much a RAID 1 array done on a software level. So that temporary storage space I had set up was, in effect, a RAID 0 array set up on, a software level. We're going to go ahead and just hit this create storage space right here so I can show you what this interface looks like. So, option to name it right here. Very handy option to assign the drive letter you want for right here. This was kind of important when I was creating that games drive because I had been using the 250 gig drive with this computer for my games, and when I created the games storage space, I wanted to make sure it had the same letter as the old 250 gig drive, so that way Windows wouldn't bitch at me when I tried to fire up a program and it was all of a sudden in a different place than where it was recorded last. We're going to leave that at G. Now here's the fun part right here, resiliency. It always defaults to two-way mirroring because the whole point is that you have some way of getting data redundancy in there and protecting your stuff in case the drive goes bad. You can set it to simple. Biggest reason you might want to do this is if you're going to create a storage space where speed is the only thing that matters. Obviously, it's going to take longer for a drive, or I'm sorry, for Windows to write data if it's got these resiliency options set. with no resiliency options, it's just striping data across all the disks, so it's going to be much faster. But as I said before, no redundancy, no protection in case a drive goes bad. You will lose all of your data. Two-way mirror, as I said, RAID 1, just as it sounds. It'll stripe data across all your disks, and then replicate that data once across all your disks, but not in the same place as the original bit that was written. And then, much in the same way, a three-way mirror. Every bit that's written, 2 other bytes are written on 2 different disks. And it does give you that little description right here. Microsoft's well-worded way is, a three-way mirror storage space writes 3 copies of your data, helping to protect you from 2 simultaneous drive failures. Now, the recommendation here is that you will have at least 5 drives for a three-way mirror. A two-way mirror requires only 2 drives. And here's the parity option. Parity, pretty much the Windows Spaces version of RAID 5 requires at least 3 drives. So it'll stripe your data across all the disks, and then it'll write a parity bit onto a separate disk, and then that way if one of your drives fails, it can rebuild the data from that drive. It won't be immediately accessible as it would be with a mirroring option, but the data will rebuild itself, and you will have the option, of course, of throwing in a new drive to replace the faulty one. So, as we're talking about all these parity options, I gotta make note about the size numbers that you've got down here. So, total pool capacity, 836 gigabytes. Available pool capacity is what's left that isn't in use currently. Maximum size. Now, as I said before, Storage Spaces makes use of the concept of thin provisioning. This really isn't a meaningful number. If I wanted to 3,000 gigabytes, why don't we just set this out to terabytes, and 25 terabytes, Windows does recognize that. I could do that if I want. This is just a ceiling number. Windows will notify me once my pool is running out of space to actually handle all of these logical drives that I'm creating on top of it. Now, the important number is the one down here, including resiliency. Now, remember how I said with parity, it stripes your data across at least 2 disks and then writes to a 3rd disk for parity? Well, that's 2 bits and then a 3rd bit for reconstruction. So, 1.5 times. A parity redundancy for a 1 terabyte storage space is going to cost you 1.5 terabytes total out of your entire pool if you were to max it out. 3-way mirror, 3 times the data. A 1 terabyte space will cost you a grand total of 3 terabytes. And 2 terabytes and a 2-way mirror. So, I'm going to cancel out of this now and pull back here. So, out over here, we can see that I've used 144 gigabytes out of my 836 gigabyte pool. Well, really, since I have 2 logical drives here set up with mirroring, really that means I have 72 gigabytes of actual data that's mirrored across all 3 drives. At any time here, if I want to, I can go ahead, add a new drive into here. It doesn't matter what the drive is, a FireWire drive, USB drive, another internal SATA drive. It really doesn't matter. It could also be a PCI solid-state disk. I don't know why I would do that, but I'm just stating. Storage Spaces just makes use of any available drive that's connected to your computer. Now, this is all great. And for my purposes, this is going to work really well, but there is a huge downside. Where Storage Spaces closely mirrors hardware RAID, it's done on a software level. You heard me mention that before. That means Windows 8 has to be booted in order to make any use out of these 2 logical drives. If Windows 8 isn't booted up, the data is unreadable by anything else, and that includes Windows 7 based computers. I have a Mac Mini over here on my desktop underneath a bunch of crap here. If I were to pull out all those drives, throw them into a DAS array and plug it into that Mac Mini, it wouldn't be able to actually see anything. Storage Spaces uses the REFS file system. It's not readable by old versions of Windows, and it's certainly not readable by other operating systems. If you are pursuing use of storage spaces in a meaningful manner, maybe similar to what I'm doing here, then you are locking yourself into using a Windows 8 system. But in order to there are other ways of getting around that, such as sharing the drives over a network while the Windows 8 system is running. But in the end, of course, you still need to have a computer running Windows 8 in order to have these drives accessible. Well, alright. That little demo clocked in at 15 minutes here. I hope you found that somewhat authoritative and informative. And I'm going to fire up Diablo 3 here. Alright. Good night, everyone.